Wars are not fought for mere parcels of land. Sometimes the greatest war is waged within the depths of a man's own soul, on the razor's edge between trust and betrayal. This is the story of one such war, the war fought by Lieutenant Jack Turner in his own private hell. It all began with the smell of gunpowder, blood, and decaying leaves. Jack listened to the crackle of the radio, his eyes fixed on the body bags lined up in the mud. A few hours ago, the contents of those bags were his men, his family. Now they were just another lost statistic to be left behind. The ambush had been sudden and savage. The dense green foliage had transformed into a death-spitting enemy, swallowing Jack's squad whole. He was the only one left alive, or rather, the only one in sight. The rest of his squad was missing, somewhere in the stomach of the jungle. Alive or dead, it was unknown. His commander's voice echoed from the radio with metallic despair. "Turner, do you copy? Fall back. This is not a search party. It's a suicide mission. You can't go anywhere alone." Jack turned off the radio. The commander was right. This was madness. But what flowed through Jack's veins at that moment was not logic, but an ice-cold rage. He gripped his rifle, rose from the muddy ground, and took a single step into the serpentine darkness of the jungle. He didn't look back, because in that jungle were not only the men he had to save. In that jungle, there was also the one man he wanted to see dead. Jack Turner was a natural-born leader. It was a quality that came not from the rank on his shoulders, but from the unwavering confidence in his gaze. He didn't just command his men, he was their older brother. He knew their fears, knew the women they wrote letters to, and shared in their dreams. This squad was a family he had built, and the foundation of every family was trust. For Jack, the most crucial part of that family was his childhood friend, almost his brother, David Miller. They had grown up together in the cornfields of Ohio, fallen for the same girls, and fixed up their first car together. Even the idea of enlisting was a shared dream. They would serve their country, become heroes. In the hellish mud of basic training, they had stood back to back, carrying each other over every obstacle. Jack's leadership was complemented by Miller's quiet strength, or so Jack had thought. They had sworn to entrust their lives to each other without hesitation. But the hell of Vietnam could turn even the strongest oaths to ash in an instant. Months earlier, during a patrol, the gates of hell had opened upon them. Machine gun fire ripped through the palm leaves like a harvester, raining down on them. Jack, as calm as ever, was shouting orders to his squad when a bullet tore through the squad's youngest member, O'Connell, who was barely 19. As the kid collapsed, groaning in pain, Jack had yelled to the one person who could provide the safest covering fire. "Miller, cover me! I have to get O'Connell! Miller, fire!" Time froze in that moment. Miller was crouched at the base of a tree, his eyes wide with terror, completely frozen. He was clutching his rifle, but his fingers wouldn't move to the trigger. He wasn't even breathing. He was just a living statue of fear. Jack's desperate shouts echoed through the green hell, but did not reach Miller. And in those few seconds, an enemy soldier took advantage of the opening Miller was supposed to be covering and unleashed a merciless volley into the wounded O'Connell. That day, a moment of cowardice didn't just cost a young soldier his life. That day, a bloody chasm that could never be closed opened between two brothers. Miller's betrayal had lodged itself in Jack's soul like a piece of shrapnel, and there it remained.
And now, months later, after another ambush, his squad was missing again. And among that squad was David Miller, still carrying that stain. As Jack ignored his commander's orders and the voice of reason, pressing deeper into the humid, suffocating jungle, a single question spun in his mind. When he found them, when he found Miller, what would he do? Would he save him, or would he leave him to the jungle's own cruel justice? This was only the beginning of the true horror he was about to face. The jungle was a living, breathing enemy. Giant trees formed a canopy that blotted out the sky, allowing only faint ethereal beams of light to pierce through. The air was heavy with the sweet, cloying scent of decaying plants, wet earth, and 1,000 flowers he couldn't name. The humidity plastered Jack's uniform to his skin like a second skin, making every movement an effort. With every step, his boots sank into the mud as if the jungle itself were trying to swallow him. But Jack knew how to read this enemy. A broken branch, an overturned leaf, a boot print sunk deeper into the mud than normal. These were all signs that his squad had passed through here and that they were alive. Each sign was a small crumb of hope that momentarily suppressed the rage within him. As the hours passed, physical exhaustion morphed into a mental war. The sounds of the jungle became an army of whispers inside his head. The cries of monkeys reminded him of O'Connell's last moments. The rustling of the wind through the leaves seemed to chant Miller's name. Jack stopped by a stream to refill his canteen. He looked at his own reflection in the water, and this faring face, caked with mud and sweat, the only thing he recognized was the unyielding fury in his eyes. He pulled a crumpled, worn photograph from his pack. In it, the entire squad was smiling in a bar in Saigon, enjoying a moment stolen from the war. O'Connell was making the silliest face, a beer bottle in hand. And right next to Jack, with an arm slung over his shoulder, stood David Miller, flashing his brightest smile. Jack covered Miller's face with his thumb. The picture looked better that way. How I trusted you. How I believed in you. Fatigue and stress began to conjure hallucinations. He would see Miller's silhouette flicker between the trees, only to realize it was just a play of shadows. The only fuel keeping him going was that dull, hard rage. After several hours of tracking, he found the first concrete sign, the bloody dog tag of one of his men, discarded at the base of a bush. The trail led to a path frequently used by the Viet Cong, a dangerous pass they called the Devil's Spine. It was then that a sound he heard would change everything. A moan, barely recognizable as human, came from the bushes. Jack raised his M16 and cautiously approached the sound. There, on the ground, lay Sergeant Kowalski from his squad, his leg grievously wounded, his uniform soaked in blood and mud. "Lieutenant Turner," Kowalski said, his consciousness fading. "They're gone. They took them." Jack knelt beside the man, pulling a bandage from his pack. "Hang on, Kowalski. Who? Where's Miller?" Kowalski coughed through the pain. "Miller. He did it again. The same thing, Lieutenant. When we were ambushed, he panicked, ignored the order to fall back. He ran the wrong way, straight into the heart of the trap, and led us all right after him."
Jack's hands froze for a moment. The words he heard destroyed the last shred of hope within him, like a poison. Miller had made the same mistake again. His cowardice had once again cost men their lives. The detail of the story that would freeze Jack's blood was this. According to Kowalski, the Viet Cong had captured the squad alive and were taking them to a nearby camp. And that camp was the infamous Bamboo Pit, a place renowned for its torture, a place that struck fear into the heart of every American soldier who heard its name. No one who entered that camp ever saw the light of day again. Jack dressed Kowalski's wound, administered his last morphine syringe, and whispered one final promise before the sergeant lost consciousness. "I'll get them back, Sergeant. I swear it." After hiding the soldier under dense foliage, open enough for a chopper to spot but hidden from the enemy, he buried his rage and sorrow deep in his heart and continued following the trail. This was no longer a rescue mission. This was personal. Hours later, he reached an area where the bamboo grew thick and the air became even heavier. He climbed to the top of a ridge and peered down through the leaves. He took an involuntary step back at the sight before him. The Bamboo Pit was there, a primitive camp surrounded by barbed wire, consisting of a few huts. And in the middle of the camp, tied hands and feet to a giant bamboo cage, was his squad. They were in a wretched state. But that wasn't what took Jack's breath away. Standing just in front of the cage, with 2 Viet Cong soldiers and a commander, was David Miller. He bore no signs of being a prisoner, and at that moment he was speaking with the commander, pointing on something on a map. The blood in Jack's veins first turned to ice, then began to boil. The worst, most unthinkable of all the scenarios in his mind was playing out before his very eyes. Miller wasn't just a coward, he was a traitor, selling out his friends, his family, to save his own skin. Jack lowered himself to the ground, bringing the rifle to his shoulder and the scope to his eye. The crosshairs swept across the camp, counting the guards, identifying the machine gun nest. And then, inevitably, it came to rest on David Miller's forehead. This was the moment of justice. For O'Connell, for Kowalski, for the squad now held captive. A single movement of his finger could end this betrayal forever. The moral dilemma was gone. This was not a rescue, it was an execution. Jack's fingers slowly curled around the trigger. He held his breath. Just then, as if sensing it, Miller briefly lifted his head and looked directly towards the ridge where Jack lay.
It was impossible for them to make eye contact, but Jack felt the gaze, and in those eyes, there was no fear or guilt. There was something else, a plan, a message. As Miller continued talking to the commander, he nonchalantly used his hand, as if scratching an itch, to point to the cage's weak point, a set of rotten vines binding the bamboo together. It was a fleeting gesture, one that no one else would notice, but Jack noticed. In a flash, Jack understood everything. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Miller wasn't betraying them. He was using the cowardice he'd carried since O'Connell's death and turning it into cunning. He was bargaining for his life, feeding the enemy false information on the map to buy time, and in doing so, showing an outsider, Jack, the squad's escape point. He may have been a coward, but he was not a traitor. The old, hardened hatred in Jack's soul cracked and shattered like a sheet of ice. This was no longer the time for forgiveness or hate. It was only time for rescue. Jack began to move like a one-man army. He checked the single grenade in his pack and his few spare magazines. The plan was simple, and as simple as it was insane. Noise and chaos.
He lobbed the grenade towards an empty guard hut on the far side of the camp. The explosion ripped through the silent jungle like an announcement of the apocalypse. The camp instantly erupted into a hornet's nest. As the soldiers ran towards the explosion, Jack slid down the ridge like a panther. In the confusion, he reached the cage. With his knife, he slashed through the rotten vines Miller had pointed out. "We're going," he yelled. The soldiers, freed from their prison, joined him in a state of shock and elation. In the heart of the firefight, Jack and Miller found themselves back to back for the first time in years. Just like the old days in training camp. Not a single word was spoken between them. There was only the sound of their breathing, the roar of their rifles, and the silent agreement of two old friends covering each other's every move. The old terror was gone from Miller's eyes. In its place was a steely determination born from a desire for redemption. As they retreated back into the jungle, a Viet Cong soldier, in a last-ditch effort, rose from the ground and aimed his rifle directly at Jack. Jack hadn't seen him, but Miller had. And in that moment, David Miller confronted the choice he had been running from his entire life. This time, he didn't run. He didn't hesitate. He gave Jack one last look, a look that was an apology, a thank you, and a farewell, and he threw himself in front of his brother. The sound of the bullets tearing through Miller's chest drowned out all the other noise of the battle. David Miller had lived his life as a coward, but that day, in a single second, he lived the bravest moment of his life. He had paid the price for his betrayal of O'Connell by saving Jack's life. As the rotor wash of the rescue chopper beat down on the treetops, the squad carried Miller's lifeless body aboard. Jack stood over him. He closed his friend's eyes. He placed his hand on the shoulder of the man he had once hated, but now respected. Jack Turner had saved his squad that day, but in the jungle, he had also found something he had lost, the complex, painful nature of forgiveness, and the knowledge that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism can be born from the shadow of the greatest mistakes. As the helicopter ascended from the green hell toward civilization, Jack did not look down, because he knew that some wars, even when they end on the battlefield, are never truly over within the soul. They only change their form, and his war was just beginning.